Welcome into the first college football playoff prediction episode. We are going to do this week, next week, and the next week until we finally get to the finalized college football playoff rankings. I'm going to be predicting who is going to get these spots. So these seeds are not about who is the best team in college football today or tomorrow. It's about who I think at the beginning of December is going to be in the bracket and where they're going to be in the bracket. So we're going to go ahead and start with the automatic bids, right? I think there's going to be obviously five of them, but two of them in the top four. So coming in at number one, I think this team will be undefeated. There is only one game that I think is challenging left on their schedule. It's Ohio State. They've got to play Michigan at the end of the year. They just beat Penn State. They've got Purdue, UCLA, Rutgers, and on the road at Michigan remaining. I think Ohio State is a much better team than Michigan. They were last year, yet they lost once again. This game is on the road. I think they could lose it. But regardless if whether or not they win or lose it, I do think that they go to the Big Ten championship. They will most likely be playing Indiana. I think they win that game outright. So I'm banking on them winning out and being 13-0 at the start of the playoffs, but things could change. They could end up being the 2 seed or the 3 seed. No matter what, though, I think Ohio State belongs here in the top 4, even if they lose to Michigan or they go undefeated in the regular season and and then they lose to Indiana in the Big Ten championship. So Ohio State is my number 1 seed. Coming in at number 2, it's got to be the winner of the SEC championship. In my opinion, it's coming down to Alabama and Texas A&M. Right now, looking at Alabama's remaining schedule, they have LSU at home, Oklahoma at home, Eastern Illinois on the road at Auburn, who just fired Hugh Freeze. LSU is in the middle of a coaching search. Auburn is in the middle of a coaching search. And then Oklahoma, I know that they've been a good team so far this season, but that loss against Ole Miss has me concerned. The loss against Texas really concerns me. That offense has not been consistent. Now, they did just come off of a road victory versus Tennessee, which I thought was very impressive, but they needed a defensive touchdown to go out and win that game. I definitely think Tennessee, kind of like the Alabama game, Tennessee was playing much better than Oklahoma, but turnovers and situational play led to their demise. That's kind of been the question mark for Tennessee for the past couple of years. So we'll have to see if they can get that solved. But anyways, going back to the main point, Alabama, I think, is going to end up being in the SEC championship along with Texas A&M. And if I was going to pick a team right now who's better, I have to go with the team that's won every single game and done it almost all of them in dominant fashion, and that's Texas A&M. This is a team where I don't know what their weakness is. Now, they have a couple of injuries that I'm a little concerned about. I wonder if Le'Veon Moss is going to be back for them sometime later in the season. I don't have an update for you on that, but I do think Marcel Reed is playing like a top 5 quarterback in the country. Mario Craver, Casey Concepcion, these are all-American type players. Marcel Reed has done almost every single thing in the book possible to win some of these games in dominant fashion, and he's done exactly that. So Texas A&M is going to be my number 3 seed. Looking at the winner of the ACC championship or the Big 12 championship, those are the two that I think will be the most interesting. So the Big 12 championship, I think, is going to come down to Texas Tech and BYU. Both of these teams have a couple of tough games left on their season, one of them being each other. They play each other, I think, this upcoming week, BYU on the road at Texas Tech. I give Texas Tech the edge in that game. So I think BYU is at a 1-loss, Texas Tech is at a 1-loss. But looking at the remainder of BYU's schedule, TCU at home, I think that's very winnable. UCF at home, I think that's very winnable. And then last but not least, you've got Cincinnati on the road. I think that's a tough game. But BYU and the way they've been playing so far this season has proved me wrong time and time again. I think BYU can absolutely go out and win that game. So 11-1 to close out the season with one conference loss. That will get you into the Big 12 championship game. And then meanwhile, Texas Tech, let me see here. Texas Tech here just got a great win versus Kansas State on the road. They've got BYU at home, UCF at home, and then at West Virginia. I think the UCF and West Virginia games are very winnable. BYU should be a winnable game since it's at home. So once again, another 11-1 team in the Big 12. So those two square off in the Big 12 championship. I give the edge to Texas Tech. I think the highest that we're going to see Texas Tech on the playoff schedule will probably be the 6th seed, maybe the 5 or maybe the 7th seed. It's going to come down to which one does the playoff committee value more, an SEC team with a one loss or a Big 12 champion with a one loss. Right now, based off of the previous rankings, I think that they're going to give that to an SEC champion with a one loss. So let's see. Texas Tech, I think, will end up being the 7th seed. So let's go ahead and plug that in. Next up, ACC champion. This right here is a certified slop fest. Georgia Tech, Virginia, Louisville all still have varying difficulties of remaining schedule. Let's look at Georgia Tech's first. At NC State, they just lost that game. At Boston College, very winnable. Pitt at home, that's a little concerning. And then Georgia at the end of the year. I think that will put Georgia Tech at a 2-loss, but only one of those being a conference loss. Then taking a look at Virginia, they have at Cal. They just won that game. Wake at home, Virginia Tech at home, two very winnable games. At Duke, that's going to be the game to determine whether or not they get into the ACC championship. And then second or third, I guess, Louisville has at Virginia Tech, Cal, Clemson, SMU, and Kentucky. They just won that game at Virginia Tech. That was a great game. Cal at home, very winnable. Clemson at home, very winnable. At SMU, SMU just beat Miami. So that's a very gutsy game that they're going to have to go in and win. And then Kentucky at the end of the year, I think Kentucky will be in the middle of a coaching search. So if I had to guess on who is going to be in the SEC or ACC championship, it's going to be Virginia and I believe Georgia Tech. Louisville could squeeze in there, but they just have a couple more games that I'm concerned about. Clemson at home should be winnable considering Clemson looks awful. But then that game at SMU, I think that has high upset potential. I mean, SMU could technically sneak into the ACC championship. They only have one conference loss. They have a leg up on Miami. All it would take is a victory versus Louisville and then Virginia or Georgia Tech to slip up, which is very possible. So SMU is still very much in the conversation. Meanwhile, Miami, goodness gracious, you thought just this past week that they were a lock for either the ACC championship game or the playoffs. I mean, they play Syracuse, NC State, Virginia Tech, and Pitt for the rest of the season. I think Pitt could go out and beat Miami. Now, will Pitt make the ACC championship? It's doubtful considering they already have one conference loss. I'm sure that Pitt's got another conference loss in their pocket somewhere. So my contenders for the ACC are Georgia Tech, Virginia, Miami, Louisville. If I had to give it to one school right now based off remaining schedule in terms of actually getting to that ACC championship and then winning it, I'm going to go with Georgia Tech, but that's a 2-loss Georgia Tech. So I think they're at the bottom or near the bottom of the playoff ranking. So I'm going to put them at the 11th seed as the automatic bid from the ACC. I don't think another ACC team gets in, by the way. Spoiler alert, they're just going to end up consuming themselves. So there's my my 4th conference champion. Let's get into my last one. It is kind of a gutsy call. I think North Texas is going to win the American Conference. They have the leg up on Navy right now. Memphis has the leg up on USF. USF already has a conference loss. USF still has some challenging games remaining. I think looking at the strength of schedule, North Texas will end up with one conference loss. USF will probably end up with 2 conference losses, and they have the leg up on Navy. So this matchup is going to come down between Memphis and North Texas. And I actually like North Texas in that game. They play kind of similar offensive styles. Drew Mestemaker is a much better passer than Brendan Lewis. So I love North Texas in this matchup. I think they win a shootout there. The game versus USF was very interesting to say the least. Byron Brown just so happens to be the best quarterback in the G6. So I love this North Texas team. I think their offense is unbelievable. I believe they're the number one scoring offense in the country. So they're going to put up points on no matter who they play. So let's go ahead and plug them in here. North Texas as my auto bid from the American Conference. Another team to watch out for, James Madison. And especially if Louisville closes out this season with just one loss and ends up being the ACC champion, James Madison could not only make an auto bid, but depending on the chaos, they could get just a regular bid. They'll be a one-loss team, most likely out of the Sun Belt. They'll be a 12-1 Sun Belt champion, and the only loss they would have would be to a Louisville that won the ACC championship. Now, obviously, that's kind of a stretch, but James Madison could absolutely be the fifth auto bid if they stay undefeated and the American Conference continues to consume itself. Like if North Texas drops another game, Memphis loses to Navy, USF loses to Navy, Navy ends up losing to North Texas in the American Championship, so on and so forth. You get the message. If the American Conference devolves into chaos and James Madison stays consistent, they're already on the verge of being a top 25 team. I think they could end up being the 16th or 17th team in the country. I would look at them to see if they can get into the college football playoff. Regardless, though, I have North Texas here as my 12th seed. Let's continue. Let's talk about the at-large bids. First up, we're going to go with the SEC. And coming in at the third seed is Alabama. I think Alabama has high potential to be a two-loss team, maybe even a one-loss team, depending on the outcome of the SEC championship. Alabama has got to play LSU, Oklahoma, Auburn, Eastern Illinois. That is going to be a very winnable schedule, in my opinion. LSU probably presents the most amount of problems. Oklahoma, the second, and then Auburn, of course, at home. That is a dangerous place to play, especially later in the season. I think Alabama is the 3 seed here, even though they're a 2-loss. And then the number 4 seed is going to end up being Indiana. Well, I might switch these around later, but for right now, I have the layout just like this. The number 4 seed is actually, I'll come back to this. We'll come back to this 4th seed spot because we're just doing SEC right now. The 5th seed, in my opinion, is going to be actually, no, the 4th seed. This is how I have it listed on my tablet here. Let's go ahead and plug this in. The 4th seed is going to be the Georgia Bulldogs. The reason being, I think they're a one-loss team. Let's see here. Georgia, Athens, Georgia. That's correct. The Georgia Bulldogs are going to be the number 4 seed because they will be a one-loss team. The reason they don't get into the SEC championship is because Alabama beats them due to the matchup that they had earlier this season. That's who I think is going to be the 4th seed as a one-loss. The next team that I want to talk about is Ole Miss. Now, this is the battle that I was talking about earlier with Texas Tech, the one-loss Big 12 champion versus a one-loss SEC team. That one-loss SEC team will be Ole Miss. I think they get the benefit of the doubt. Their only loss will be to Georgia. I think that's extremely impressive. So Ole Miss gets the bid here at the 6th spot. Let's see. Ole Miss, there they are. Next up, I've got maybe this is a big stretch in my opinion, but quite frankly, I don't see any other team that could fill this spot. I have Vanderbilt getting into the college football playoff. Their 2 losses are going to come to Texas, which will end up being a top 25 team, and Alabama, which will be the number 3 team in the country. So I think Vanderbilt sneaks in here, and I think they sneak in at the 10 seed. Actually, I really do think that they'll get the benefit of the doubt over an independent team. So we're going to give Vanderbilt the 9 seed here. 2-loss Vanderbilt with some very close losses to Texas and to Alabama. The scoreboards don't really reflect that, but I definitely think Vanderbilt deserves a spot here, especially if they win out. Let's look at the remaining part of their schedule here. So they just lost to Texas on the road. That's a tough one. They lost to Alabama on the road as well. Vanderbilt, what's their remaining schedule look like? They have Tennessee remaining at Tennessee, and I believe that should be it in terms of really tough games to match up against. I was expecting Vanderbilt to be a three-loss team. They absolutely still could be. Tennessee could 100% beat them at home. But right now, I think considering what they've been able to do against other similarly caliber SEC opponents like LSU, I think they can beat Tennessee. So this will be my fifth bid from the SEC going into the college football playoff. Now let's talk about the Big Ten. I think Indiana is going to end up with just one loss. So I'm going to give them the the fifth seed here. I think the only game that they lose is to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship, but I think they lose in very convincing fashion. Ohio State is the best team in the country. People already are pretty biased against Indiana. This doesn't mean that I think that they're the fifth best team in the country. I absolutely think they could go toe to toe with Georgia, but regardless, I think the anti-Indiana bias is going to come out here. So Indiana gets that fifth seed. Coming in at the eighth seed is going to be Oregon to me. Oregon should be, quote unquote, should be a one loss going into this, but they have some dangerous games remaining on the schedule at Iowa, at Washington, home for USC, home for Minnesota. All four of those teams have played way above their belt level. I think Oregon has been known to play down a little bit, especially on the road to some of these teams. Washington and Iowa are the ones that I'm looking at because they're on the road. So I'm going to put Oregon here at this 8 spot, but don't be surprised if this ends up being a two-loss team that ends up missing the playoffs due to a road loss, especially versus Washington at the end of the season. So looking at the 10th seed, I think if Notre Dame can win out, which I definitely think they can based off the remaining parts of their schedule, I think there's no way you deny them. They're such a big brand. Their two losses would come against Miami, which will probably be a top 25 team, and Texas A&M, which will end up being a top 4 team. All that being said, I think Notre Dame has the not the resume, but the credibility because they've just been such a consistent playoff team. There they are, Notre Dame. I think that they're going to get in here. So this is what our playoff bracket looks like here. Let's see. Number 1, Ohio State. Number 2, Texas A&M. 3, Alabama. 4, Georgia. 5, Indiana. 6, Ole Miss. 7, Texas Tech. 8, Oregon. 9, Vanderbilt. 10, Notre Dame. 11, Georgia Tech. And 12 is North Texas. So let's break down what I think is going to happen in the playoffs. First up, we've got Indiana the other way around. North Texas at Indiana. North Texas has been an extremely explosive team, but I think Indiana at this 5 spot is going to feel unbelievably disrespected and motivated. This is a home game, so I'm going to float Indiana here. There's not really a big question to have in my mind. Meanwhile, Oregon, home game versus Vanderbilt. Same logic here. I think that Vanderbilt has a chance to win this game. Diego Pavia has been somebody that I have doubted at every turn, and he's proven me wrong at almost every single turn. Alabama, I thought he played great outside of the 2 turnovers. Texas, I thought that resilience there at the end of the game, unbelievable. He absolutely played his best football versus LSU. That is the Diego Pavia that everybody knows and loves. That's why I think he's a Heisman contender. Do I think he can beat Oregon on the road? Absolutely. But home field advantage and Dante Moore having some more experience under his belt, I think Oregon with Dan Lanning wins this game. This one will be the closest of all the games. Oregon is my winner here, though. Next up, let's talk about Ole Miss, Georgia Tech. Will Trinidad Chambliss be the starter remaining? Absolutely. This guy might just be a top 3 quarterback in the country with the way that he's playing. That gutsy win versus Oklahoma last week or 2 weeks ago, I guess now, is unbelievable. So I love this matchup here for Ole Miss. High-scoring game. This is going to be really entertaining. I'm so excited to see Jamal Hayes and Haynes King match up against this Ole Miss defense, which is, quite frankly, not that great. I think Ole Miss gets the better of the Yellow Jackets here. I don't think this one's going to be relatively close either. And then this next matchup is my favorite one of the playoffs. Notre Dame on the road versus Mr. Moneybags, Texas Tech. I am super excited to think about this game. I think that this will be probably the most highly contested in terms of like early pick'ems that we'll see. Notre Dame, of course, known for their physicality on the offensive side of the football. If you don't believe me, just go ask USC. They got throttled in the run game by Jeremiah Love, one of the best players in the country. Notre Dame has struggled in a few of the matchups that they've had so far this season, coming back from the losses to Texas A&M and Miami. Think about this, by the way. Notre Dame, a lot of people are going to argue about whether or not that they get in. If you look at their two losses, it's by a combined 4 points. If they just continue to dominate their lesser opponents, I absolutely believe that they will be in the playoff conversation. They're already a top 11, top 10 school in the AP poll. If the college football playoff acknowledges that by any means necessary, there will be some other teams that are ahead of Notre Dame right now that will end up dropping games, and Notre Dame will only go up from there. So I think they are a safe bid here. But meanwhile, this matchup versus Texas Tech, it's hard for me to see Notre Dame winning this game. That environment in Lubbock is going to be electric, to say the least. I think as long as Texas Tech's quarterback, Baron Morton, is healthy for this game, which he has had some major health issues. Their backup quarterback also, I believe, tore his ACL and is out for the season. Texas Tech is going to have their quarterback healthy in this game if they even want to compete. I think that they will. This is going off of whether or not every team is healthy. So I'm going to give Texas Tech this win. I think that their style of football perfectly matches up against Notre Dame. I think they play physical. They try to impose their will, and Notre Dame has only seen that twice this season, and they lost both times. So Texas Tech pulls off, in my opinion, an upset against Notre Dame to go match up against Texas A&M in a neutral site. So we'll flip back over here and talk about the 4-5 matchup. Georgia versus Indiana. This is going to be, quite frankly, the matchup of the century in terms of generic college football talking points. SEC versus Big Ten, and quite frankly, a disrespected Big Ten team. Georgia, by all means necessary, should win this game and dominate if you are just a casual college football fan, because Georgia's in the SEC and they play great. But let me tell you this right now. This is the worst Kirby Smart Georgia team in the last 5 or 6 years. I don't think that this Georgia team is really that good. I think they played a fairly weak and favorable schedule. I thought the win versus Ole Miss was pretty impressive. I'm going to see how they play versus Texas later this week. It's at home. They should win it. They should beat Georgia Tech. But man, this Georgia team is not the same. That loss versus Alabama, that the need to come from behind after letting Tennessee, which is going to end up being a 3, maybe even a 4-loss team, hang 44 on you. The defense just doesn't have the same dominance that they have had for years. The offense has been playing better, but they're not the caliber of an Ole Miss, an Alabama, a Texas A&M, even in Indiana. And so that's why I'm actually going to give Indiana the win here. I think this is going to be the shocker of all of the college football playoff. I think Indiana can win this game versus Georgia. Let's move on and talk about Ohio State, Oregon. These two teams, quite frankly, are on two different stratospheres. Oregon is so unbelievably young this season. The fact that they would make the college football playoff is all compliments here to Dan Lanning. And then Ohio State, man, they are just such a well-oiled machine. We haven't really even seen their highest potential yet. Julian Sain is still learning. He's still experiencing new things as a young quarterback. They have the two best players in college football. That's Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs. These guys on both sides of the football are dominant. Oregon doesn't have that this season. I don't think that they can compete versus Ohio State. We saw how that went last year in a neutral site. So Ohio State gets the win here. We have a rematch of the Big Ten championship. Moving on here, talking about Alabama, Ole Miss. As of right now, Alabama, to me, is far and away the second best team in the SEC. Quite frankly, some might argue that they are the best team in the SEC. 4 straight weeks of road victories, a gutsy win versus a good South Carolina team that has just been disappointing so far this season. And Ole Miss has had several weird instances, right? They go and they compete versus Georgia on the road. They were up in that game and then ended up losing, but then they also almost lose to Washington State. That was such a weird game. They go on the road, they beat Oklahoma in a gutsy game, but then they come and they struggle against South Carolina. I don't know. This Ole Miss team has just shown me inconsistency after inconsistency. Trinidad Chambliss has been so great for them. Even their backup quarterback, who was at first their starter, Austin something. I can't remember his last name off the top of my head, but we all know who I'm talking about. I think Ole Miss, the inconsistencies here are going to finally trip them up based off of their relatively weak schedule. I think Alabama gets the win here. Texas Tech versus Texas A&M, neutral site game. I think Texas A&M shakes off the rust, which we saw last year. There were a couple teams that got the bye that struggled to win in these games. Georgia struggled against Notre Dame. Oregon struggled against Ohio State. There's a couple of these games where I think Texas Tech could win versus Texas A&M. But if you're going on like 100 games, right, you're playing this game 100 times, I think Texas A&M wins 90% of them. Texas Tech has had a very impressive season. They are indeed a college football playoff contender. They can win a playoff game, especially if it's at home. So Texas A&M wins this matchup, though, because I think Marcel Reed is playing like probably the best, if not the second or maybe third best quarterback in the country right now. The only ones playing better are Julian Sayin, Fernando Mendoza, Ty Simpson. That's really it. So now we've basically got the 4 best quarterbacks, the 4 best teams in the playoffs here. Indiana versus Ohio State. Fernando Mendoza is looking for revenge here. Can he do it? I don't think so. I think Ohio State has the leg up here. They win this matchup versus Indiana. This is going to be closer than people like to think. Curt Cignetti is, quite frankly, a top 5 coach in college football. Now, Ryan Day is also mentioned in that convo. He could definitely win this game, Fernando Mendoza and Curt Cignetti. But Ohio State is playing like the best team in the country. I cannot doubt them as of right now. I have to give the leg up to them. This could definitely be a shootout. It could be a defensive slugfest. Indiana can win this game. I want to say it over and over and over again. But for now, I have Ohio State getting the upper hand here. Alabama, Texas A&M. I think this is going to work one of 2 ways. And the 2 ways that I'm thinking are whoever wins the SEC championship loses the college football playoff game. I had Texas A&M winning the SEC championship. I think they are more in a zen state right now than Alabama, but Alabama has these proven gutsy wins versus very tough opponents. Georgia being one of them, Vanderbilt being another. That road win versus South Carolina was just so unbelievably important to the culture and the vibes at Alabama. And for those of you who don't think that that's that's not a thing, that's just a bunch of BS rah-rah talk. Well, you talk to that Alabama team if they lost to South Carolina. When you get punched in the mouth by a physical team like South Carolina and you respond, you make adjustments, and you're creative in doing so, like Alabama was on those final 2 drives, that's how you go out and win football games, tough ones. This is a neutral site game. I think Alabama wins this game. The Crimson Tide are there. In my opinion, Alabama is either going to win the SEC championship or win multiple playoff games. One or the other. I don't think it will be both, just because that's a lot of victories to line up together. I think Alabama gets this one over A&M, vice versa if Alabama ends up winning the SEC championship. So now, national championship, Ohio State versus Alabama. We have seen this script twice in the last 10 years. Ohio State and Ezekiel Elliott and that stacked roster matched up against Alabama back in 2015, and Ohio State dominated them. That giant run by Ezekiel Elliott to seal the game for a touchdown, that was the emphatic statement. But years later, 2020, I was there in Miami for the national championship, Alabama versus Ohio State. Quite frankly, that Alabama team might be a top 5 best team of all time, maybe even top 3 behind LSU and Miami. I think that Alabama team was dominant. They showed it on the field. They destroyed Ohio State in that game. This season, the matchup, in my opinion, is much more even. And Caleb Downs could be staring a second national championship in the face in front of the team that he transferred away from. Remember, 2 years ago, Nick Saban and Caleb Downs helped lead Alabama to the playoffs, and they were one overtime play away from beating Michigan, the eventual national championship. Nick Saban retires. Caleb Downs transfers to Ohio State, and he goes on last year to win that natty. This is repeat time for him. And the rest of this Ohio State group, Julian Sand, also another former Alabama player, has transferred to Ohio State to be the starting quarterback. He would have been sitting behind Ty Simpson. And quite frankly, rightfully so. I mean, Ty Simpson's got the seniority and he's been playing great so far this season. So I am a firm believer that this is the most interesting matchup in terms of storylines. Two players trying to get a leg up on a team that they abandoned. Meanwhile, that same team seeking revenge. Kalen DeBoer trying to prove you don't leave Alabama to go seek better opportunities. Alabama is that place to seek the best opportunities. And he has done that so far this season. Now, I'm going to give the edge here to Alabama. I think Alabama can win this national championship. The reason that I say that is they have been forced in these very tough matchups to win close games. That is so unbelievably important when you don't have a overall talent advantage. Now, think about, for example, Michigan versus TCU, or not TCU, TCU versus Georgia a few years ago in the national championship. Georgia, quite frankly, didn't have that many tough games that they had to play that season. And they dominated TCU because there was a talent gap. There's no talent gap here. This Alabama team is probably the most talented since the 2020 national championship team. Now, they're not as good, but they're close. Meanwhile, Ohio State, once again, building on their young success. Julian Sayans, still a young player. Jeremiah Smith, only a sophomore. Caleb Downs, only a junior. They bring in some transfers at running back. I think the other thing about this game is Ohio State has struggled to run the football. Alabama's biggest weakness is stopping the run. If you force Julian Sand to pass against this secondary, I think Alabama's secondary with Keon Sabb and a ton of other talented guys, they're going to get the advantage on Ohio State. Meanwhile, Alabama has struggled to run the football. Ohio State's defense has been dominant all around, but I think Ty Simpson's better than any defense out there this season. I think he's probably the best quarterback out of anyone that I've seen play so far this season. There's a couple of advantages that I give to Alabama here. I know people will think I'm crazy. People might think I'm a homer. I am a person from Alabama. I went to the University of Alabama. I've watched them my entire life. And the reason that I'm able to be so confident that Alabama can win this national championship is because I've seen what success looks like in the past. That same success is being paralleled today. This Alabama team looks like a Nick Saban team from the past. Not necessarily in the physicality, but the overall discipline and the ability to absorb punches, respond, and adjust to what other teams are throwing at you. They have done that on a very high level. Ryan Grubb being the OC this year has made a world's worth of difference. This Alabama offense is clicking on all cylinders. Even when they're not, they're still able to kind of move the football. I think that's going to be the difference maker here against Ohio State. So Alabama is my national champion. I think this is a much closer game than people would like to think. Now, could they lose to Texas A&M? Absolutely. Are they going to lose to Ole Miss at home? Probably not. But Alabama could stop right here in the college football quarterfinals, or excuse me, semifinals, and then they could lose to Ohio State. I'm not here to say, oh, Alabama's going to run the table, no questions asked. They could absolutely lose well before the national championship. So that's going to be my college football playoff predictor for now. I'm going to do another one next week and the next week following, just so we get final predictions and see how accurate we've been. So this is mine for now. I'm going to take a screenshot of this and we'll come back to it next week and see how we're doing so far. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and we will see you next time.